Alien prison guards found Christmas gifts in every cell. One human janitor worked all night. The detention ring on Vesar 9 orbited like a cold bead, its surface pocked with observation ports and the faint scars of prior uprisings. Prisoners lay in cells stacked like honeycomb, each cube lit by a single dim orb that hummed in a language of frequencies no human vocal cord could match. The guards, tall, braided, and scaled in dark uniforms, kept their patrols strict and their faces stricter. They ran the facility with a mechanical morality. The law was a lattice, and everyone in it occupied a predetermined slot. Kaido Vale had a different kind of job. He was a janitor, a human in a place that preferred not to notice humans. He had been transferred as part of a litany of labor trades between allied systems: custodial duty, maintenance, and the unique privilege of wandering spaces where official doctrine feared to tread. Kaido's uniform was a simple gray, smudged at the elbows. His hands were permanent residents of grease and solvent. He moved through the corridors at night with a mop and a soft radio that translated the guards' low clicks into something about pipe pressure and scheduled cleans. It was the night before the Viserion festival, what humans would call a holiday, when Kaido decided to do something officially unproductive. The guards had their rituals, clockwork rounds, ritualized checks at exactly 10, 20, and 30 minutes past each hour. They prided themselves on symmetry. Kaido, who had sweated under their glare for 2 rotations, learned the timing like a secret language. That evening, after the prisoners' meager meals were collected and the orb lights dimmed, he lingered by the supply locker and opened a battered duffel he'd been carrying for weeks. Inside were small things, improvised gifts not sanctioned by any authority and not declared on any manifest. He had not planned them all at once. Some were traded from sympathetic cooks, a copper cup with a dent that made it look like a smile. Others were scavenged, a strip of reflective film that could be folded into a star, a scrap of fabric dyed by kitchen spies from a supply ship. There were practicalities, heaters that had been cleared for scrap but still held residual warmth, and sentimentalities, old photos from a crew member who insisted the images were worthless but let Kaido have one anyway. Kaido moved with quiet precision, slipping between patrols. When a guard's footsteps approached, he crouched behind bulkheads and listened to the redundant chant of duty until the sound moved on. He had done his rounds earlier and knew the cell's occupants, not by number alone, but by small details cataloged like fossils. Prisoner 112 kept a pebble under his pillow. Prisoner 395 hummed while sleeping. Prisoner 207 kept 3 folded origami birds in a corner. He began at one end. The cell doors were heavy and sealed, but maintenance keys, on a ring he'd been given for trivial repairs, fit the locks with the unremarkable authority of someone who fixed things. The first gift was simple: a strip of reflective film folded into a small star hung from the grate. When he moved to the next cell, he left a stitched blanket, patched from discarded robes and towel fibers, tucked between the mattress and the wall. Someone would wake to warmth that morning they hadn't expected. There were guards on duty in the corridor above, their boots clacking in metronome precision. Kaido timed himself to their rhythm. He flattened himself against shadows. An animal learned to breathe silently. He worked as a janitor works best, methodically, with the unspoken assumption that what you touch becomes cleaner and kinder. Some cells presented problems. One prisoner, a narrow-limbed poet whose voice had been harvested for propaganda before his conviction, had no room for physical gifts. Instead, Kaido left him a pencil, an old one, sharpened, and a scrap of paper with a crude drawing of a tree. Another inmate, a former engineer, was given a pack of salvaged batteries and a note, for when the sky is dark. The notes were brief. Kaido didn't write much. Language felt fragile enough without being overused. Around midnight, a guard's patrol changed pattern. The clack of armored feet deviated by a single step. Kaido paused in a shadow, heart thudding, and watched a patrol tunnel past his aisle. The janitor's hands had a map of the facility memorized like the ridges on his palms. When the pathway cleared, he resumed, moving faster but with the same careful thoroughness. He moved like someone who believed in the moral geometry of small favors. A kindness added, he thought, was a slight adjustment of a ship's course. By the time the first pale light of Vesar's twin moons softened the corridor, there was a small constellation of gifts across the detention ring. A cup taped to a cell door held a single crystal that warmed when cupped. A length of fabric sewn into a small animal rested on a bunk. A tiny mechanical bird, crafted from a clockwork motor and a strip of copper, sat on a shelf, its wings ready to catch imaginary currents. Each gift was mismatched, imperfect, and given with the quiet authority of someone who had decided human decency did not require permission. The morning shift stumbled into the facility with coffee and preconceptions. Guards blinked at the subtle disruptions to their order. The first discovery was pragmatic, a blanket draped over a cell doorway that could have been contraband. A more careful guard lifted it and found a note pinned beneath, for warmth. "K." That guard's jaw softened in a fraction, an expression the prisoners rarely saw. And then things became contagious. A prisoner lifted the blanket and, instead of tearing it for material, read the note aloud. The engineer checked the pack of batteries and set them aside for a lantern that had gone dark. A poet unfolded his paper and began to mark it with ink. Rumors spread in the low frequencies that carried through the vents. A human had worked all night. The guards reacted as their doctrine allowed. Suspicion first, ritual second. Security manifestos were consulted. The surveillance logs were reviewed. Interrogations began, soft, then harder, probing for accomplices. Kaido was summoned to the central corridor, still in his gray uniform, mop bucket trailing like a ghost of labor. He walked with the measured gait of someone who had spent nights in the company of solitude. The head warden's expression cycled through protocol, accusation, calculation, and then something quieter. He asked Kaido why. The janitor shrugged, as if surprised by the question's existence. "They need it," he said simply. Tonight seemed long. The warden hesitated, the space between doctrine and compassion conspicuous. Surveillance footage could justify disciplinary action. Policy could line up a dozen justifications. But policies were made by committees that rarely spent nights walking corridors and listening to the hum of prisoners breathing. A guard who had found a steaming cup on his post the previous night spoke before the warden could find the right line in the rulebook. His voice had the soft incline of someone who had been up all night and had seen a little humanity in the cracks. "He left them," the guard said. "They were warm." Discipline was discussed and then deferred. The warden issued fines, paperwork, mostly, and a stern lecture that satisfied the letter of command. In practice, the gifts remained. Prisoners adapted quietly. The batteries powered a tiny lamp for shared readings. The mechanical bird was wound and placed on a windowsill where it clicked like a small promise. The guards, who had for so long occupied the space between order and indifference, found themselves asked, subtly, to look at those they policed. Kaido returned to his mop bucket and the ordinary rituals of cleaning stains off institutional walls. He never sought praise. He had no hunger for recognition. But the prisoners began to leave small things for him in return. A folded paper with a list of names he might someday use, a small gear polished to a shine, a crude charm made of solder and string. They called him, in a tone that carried something like affection, Janitor of Nights. The festival came and went. Policies remained. Systems reasserted themselves. Yet the memory of a night when a human walked the halls and left warmth like contraband lingered in the detention ring's hum. It became, in small rumors, a story replaced by other stories. How one janitor's small, unauthorized kindness bent the arc of an evening and reminded both captor and captive that the machinery of incarceration could still be softened by acts no lawbook endorsed.